Okay, wow. What an amazing movie. That was so beautiful. Um, I'm super happy now to be joined by Clement Virgo, the director of Brother, who's here to answer a couple questions. So, welcome, Clement. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, Ashley, and thank you for screening the film. It's an honor to be with you on in Black History Month.
Of course, and thank you for making the time to come. So, Clement, as you know, we just watched the film, so there's no spoilers. We can talk about anything we want. So,
Oh,
let's just
perfect.
jump right into the questions. So Brother is adapted from David Shariandi's novel. What is it that initially drew you to this story, and what made you feel it needed to be seen on screen?
First of all, a friend of mine read the novel at first and really encouraged me to buy it and to read it, and I didn't. I sort of put it off for a while, and then I was in a bookstore one day and I picked it up and I bought it, and when I was on holidays. I read it and I read it in maybe a couple sittings, and I was so moved by the story. It felt very familiar, you know. David Cherry Andy gave us a gift with that novel, or at least it gave me a gift with that novel. The brothers in that story, they're from Trinidad, and their family's from Trinidad, and I'm from Jamaica. My family came from Jamaica and immigrated to Toronto, immigrated to Canada, and all the kind of resonance that's in that story, I felt and I knew, and in some ways it felt like it was written just for me, and I was really touched and moved by it, and I realized that I had to make it into a film, and it was just before. I started writing it just before COVID, and then once COVID hit, I thought, like, what is it? You start to reflect, at least I did, and started to think about how I wanted to spend my time and the kind of films that I wanted to make, and I made Brother as if it was my last film in some ways, and so it's a very personal film, and then David Cherry wrote a brilliant novel.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting. It's clear through how well you made the film that it's something you connect with, and you mentioned it's something familiar to you, and your family's from Jamaica. Um, did you? Is there anything about your story that, like, how did your personal story influence the way that you approached the story? Like, anything you changed or kept the
Yeah,
same?
in some ways, I feel like my immigrant story is not that unique. I think I was part of the wave
Hmm.
of Caribbean immigrants that came to Canada in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I was a part of that wave, and so I don't think my particular story is unique. In some ways, I am. As a kid, I knew that I wanted to be an art. I loved art. I love music. I love films. I love drawing. I love writing. But I never, it was never something I thought I could use. I could be, I never thought I could be a filmmaker. It was just a passion. It was just a hobby.
Hmm.
Um, and what's interesting about the novel itself is that the character Francis he loves art. He loves music, and so I really identify with that.
Yeah.
Identify with that sense of having this thing in society of you that you want to express and share and just kind of communicate and connect with others with, and so it's from that standpoint. I knew that I had to make it, and I when I met with David, and I was a little nervous. I said to him, "Look, your characters are from Trinidad and I'm from Jamaica. Like we're like cousins, but I wanted to not think about all the sort of cultural specifics. I didn't want to think. I just wanted to rely on my instincts and
Hmm.
on my sense of memory making the film. And so we turned the characters into Jamaicans.
Hmm. Yeah, that's nice. I like how you mentioned just just the experience, nothing specific to culture,
Yeah,
um, and the way that it kind of brings everyone together.
yeah, yeah.
Um, was there anything about translating this intimate story from, a literary story into a visual medium?
Uh, no, what's brilliant about David's novel is that he's in some ways laid out a template
Mm.
uh, for us or for me to follow. And it's the fastest screenplay I've ever written in my life. I think I wrote it in 10 days.
Wow.
I thought about it for maybe 3 months, taking notes to myself and where I wanted the stories to go. But once I sat down to write, I remember because it was just before Christmas, and I wrote for about 4 days up until Christmas Eve, and then I took Christmas Eve and Christmas Day off, and then I wrote for the Boxing Week, and then I sent it out because I wanted to see if I could finish it before New Year's Eve, and I did. I had the first draft before New Year's Eve, and I sent it off to my producing partner, and he said he read it that night and said he thought it was a great script. But it just kind of came out of me really easy.
Hmm.
And David sort of laid out a template. He sort of plays with time in the novel, and of course, as the film is very different. You have to somehow translate all these literary um, devices into a visual storytelling.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I just kind of used, used my instincts around that. And in the novel is a bit of a mystery. And I
Hmm.
wanted to kind of play with those genre elements as well. I wanted to play with the idea of mystery and suspense, and just using the sort of the cinematic language of suspense and
Hmm.
mystery in helping to kind of intrigue you, like what happened to Francis, and hopefully that
Yeah.
will hook you to kind of keep you watching the film all the way through.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely did. You like, in addition to that mystery, is there anything specific, like, do you remember any specific scenes you read in the book or anything like that that you thought this needs to be translated to to like brought to life on the big screen?
I
Anything?
think, yeah, I
No, go
think
ahead.
no, I think the ending, I mean, everyone's just saw the film, so everyone knows how the film ends, but, and what happened to Francis. When I read it in the novel, I was quite moved by it, and
Hmm.
I was quite sort of touched, the kind of loss, kind of potential, and I felt like Francis. I felt the frustration. I felt the being misunderstood. I felt having um, all this sort of energy in me that I wanted to express, but I didn't know how to express. I was familiar with the kind of masculine pose, the kind of posing in some ways. You kind
Yeah.
of. I grew up in, the book is set in Scarborough, but I grew up in a place called Regent Park for my formative years, and so I knew that world, and to kind of survive in a place like Regent Park, you had to have a kind of posture. You had to have a kind of, like
Hmm.
Jamaicans would call it screw face, to kind of move through the world. And yeah, and that's what I took on.
Yeah. I was actually just gonna um, start talking about that, the film, the themes that it explores, brotherhood, masculinity, and emotional vulnerability. You touched on masculinity. Is there anything else on in those three themes you kind of want to talk about that specifically were important to you, and why you're drawn to those themes?
Yeah, I was drawn to the themes of masculinities because I think a lot of young men, particularly young black men, um, trying to figure out their way in the world. How does one be in the world? You
Hmm.
know, um, the world might see you in one way, but you see yourself in another way. And I was a sensitive, vulnerable kid, but I couldn't always express that.
Hmm.
I loved art, but I couldn't always sort of express that vulnerable side to me because there's a sense that being vulnerable is dangerous. It could get you hurt, you know. And I think a lot of young men, I think, sort of struggle with that. And I wanted to explore that on screen, but I also wanted to tell the story of the mother. I saw
Hmm.
my own mother in that character, and I wanted to make a film that honored her sacrifice and honored what she did. I mean, as a kind of a young woman who came to Canada with four
Mhm.
kids and made a decision to kind of do that. It's a very bold and brave thing to do, and you don't fully appreciate that until you're older and have your own kids
Mhm.
and realize the kind of courage and strength, and the countless mothers, black mothers who would do anything to ensure their kids' future. And I wanted to make a story that honored that and sort of celebrated that.
Mhm. Yeah, that's very nice. I've heard some people say that the film could be called Mother, just focusing on Ruth and her story, and that is very powerful. You spoke a bit about Francis and his masculine pose, you said, and how deep down he cares for the arts, he likes music, all of those different things. And in the film, you know, he has a male partner. Is there anything you want to talk about that or to expand on?
Yeah, I mean, I saw that. I saw it. There's a kind of there is a kind of performance of masculinity, a performance of masculinity that I saw growing up, and I participated in it. And I grew up with friends that were close, and connected. So I knew people like Francis and Jelly,
Hmm.
but it's not something that you spoke about openly. It wasn't something that but I saw it around. And it is part of the community, and so um, I wanted to also just talk about just pe intimacy between people, but also
Hmm.
intimacy between young men, friendships, even just friendships,
Yeah.
and how does one connect, that way, and it's as a filmmaker, as a kid, I was quite shy, so I spent a lot of my time observing. I spent a
Hmm.
lot, I was that kid in the corner who was always was kind of watching and taking notes. And I think
Hmm.
it served me well because it sort of helped me to kind of develop my visual, character sense and my sense of visuals. And so I was always observing relationships and seeing how people connected.
Yeah.
And it's trying to make a story that felt emotionally truthful, that you
Mhm.
identify with, and to talk about you know, these two young men who connected in an emotional and psychological and physical way.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. With all of this talk about masculinity and brotherhood in the men, what is it exactly you hope that young audiences or specifically young men take away from this story?
As a filmmaker, I'm always trying to figure out how to smuggle ideas in, and not to kind of be didactic and not to be preachy and not to have in my films feel like they're medicine. And so my hope, my hope is to entertain. My hope is to give the audience an emotional experience. My hope is to kind of communicate and connect, and to have the audience identify with maybe one or two characters on the screen. And so I don't take people's attention, especially nowadays, for granted. If someone's going to invest 2 hours at a time to watch film, you want to, first of all, for me, entertain, but also hopefully smuggle in some ideas that will affect and move them and make them think perhaps afterwards.
So just thinking more and just contemplating.
Or maybe make you think about something that you haven't thought about before. My
Yeah.
favorite films do that to me. My favorite films make me see the world in a new way, or
Yeah.
or or, or look at it from an angle that I never thought about before. And I like watching films that, in a way, kind of leave space for me to kind of decode them and to
Yeah.
participate as an audience,
Yeah.
and to allow it gives me space to kind of bring myself into it, as opposed to just kind of wash over me. You know,
Yeah.
I like a good I like a good kind of entertain a big Hollywood blockbuster Avatar movie, but I also like those films. I like films um, that speak about our collective humanity,
Yeah.
and because I think that's what stories are. You know, stories are a metaphor for how to live in the world.
Yeah.
From like Bible stories to children's stories. You know, it's like there are parables and of how and of how us as human beings fare in the world. You know.
That's a great answer. It's very, very good answer. So shifting a little bit, what we saw through the movie is that gives us a powerful portrait of Black Canadian life. How important was authenticity in portraying this community?
I wanted it to be specific. You know, I wanted set in Scarborough. I grew up downtown, so I just went to Scarborough. I went to certain parts of Scarborough. I played basketball a little bit, so I would go to tournaments in Scarborough, and I had a few friends in Scarborough, but I didn't really know Scarborough like I know, say, downtown, and
Hmm.
so I spent some time up there and really kind of get to know the community. And also, Scarborough is such a vibrant, just shooting the film there partially, you just see that the kind of dynamic and energy and the full spectrum
Yeah.
of what I think Canada is going to look like in the next 50 years, the next 100 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very diverse, dynamic, um, propulsive, energetic community. Uh, and and I wanted to make a film that honored that. And because I think ultimately optimistic. Um, the film is tough, and I knew that when I was making it, it would be some ways affecting and tough. But at the same time, I want to part of as an artist, I want to sort of put light into the world. If you're going to spend 2, 3 years of your life making a film, you want to somehow figure out how to contribute something
Yeah.
positive into the
Yeah.
universe, and I hope that brother did that.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about that. What exactly, what light or what hope do you want people to feel, or do you hope they feel through the watching this film and seeing the ending and everything and even
Yeah.
symbolism?
I think the best stories, stories in general that are life affirming, that everyone, no one goes through life without having these moments of doubt or setbacks or loss. Loss is a part of life. Setbacks are part, pain, some would call it trauma is a part of life, but we don't want to, we want to believe, or at least I want to believe, that there is um, a kind of transformation that could come out of that crucible and come out through the other side in a positive way, and be life affirming. And then you could pass that on to the next generation or to the next, and I think that's what storytellers do, you have an experience and then you tell that story to remind people or remind others that you're not alone. Because sometimes when you're going through that sense of loss, you might think you're the only person, the only human being in the planet, history of the planet, who's ever felt that loss or felt that kind of pain. And stories are a way to remind you that there's a collective pain, but there's also a collective joy and collective redemption.
Nice, yeah, that's good. And just jumping back a little bit to the portrayal of Black Canadian life and the authenticity. You mentioned this story kind of resonates with you and your childhood and growing up. Have do you what do you think has changed in for Black Canadians since then, or if anything, do you think we're moving towards? The film obviously covers some emotional and some dark topics. Do you think things have changed? How do you feel about that?
You know, I've lived in Canada for a long time. You know, I came here as a kid and I've seen the cycles. And but I there's it sort of goes. I think life, and I think society and culture goes in waves. You know what I mean? I think collectively now we're seeing one kind of a wave that's happening. And but the wave that's currently happening is not new. It's just a part of a kind of a cycle. I think I don't know who said it. I think it might be Faulkner who said history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And I feel like as Black Canadians, we go through the cycles of that rhyme. Where there's positive, we make some gains, and then perhaps some of those gains are taken back, and then we have, and then you kind of we sort of fight to get those gains returned, and then perhaps there's a kind of a setback. And so I think just Black folks in the diaspora, we've always been um, progressive and pushing forward. And I
Yeah.
think no different than like the Black Canadians. I think that we are resilient. We are determined, and I think that you know, Canada, well, Black Canadians have and will continue to contribute to the Canadian culture and society at large.
It's beautiful. Yeah, resilience is a big theme here. Okay, we're going to wrap it up with one final question. In making this film and your other films as well, what responsibility do you feel when telling stories that represent underrepresented communities?
It's an interesting it's interesting. When I was younger, I would resist the term responsibility. I was like as a younger artist, a younger filmmaker, because I just but as I get older, you kind of accept that perhaps that's a part of your responsibility is to yourself, but also to your family, but also to your community. And within that, try to try to make something that speaks to you first and foremost. But it's the same time, and something that you're proud of, but also something that if I show my niece or that she could say, "Oh, I like that one. That one was good." And
Yeah.
that affected me. So I feel a responsibility to myself as an artist, but I don't want to be presumptuous to say, I'm gonna, you should listen to me as an artist. I just wanted to say, this is what I've been thinking about. This is what I would love to communicate, and I want to smuggle it through film.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm really lucky, very, very glad to have spoken with you today, and I'm very happy to have learned a little bit more about the film and what went in behind the scenes and in the background in your mind and everything. It's very, very impactful stuff that you've shared with us today. So thank you so much for making the time to come speak with me.
Absolutely, and thank you guys for having me, and thank you, Ashley. That was great job. You did a great job.
Oh, thank you. All right.